You lie on the table. The machine hums. A ring of emitters rotates around your torso at 4 revolutions per second, firing X-ray photons through your body from every angle, while a detector array on the opposite side captures what passes through. 90 seconds later, you slide out. The radiologist gets the images, and you get dressed and leave. Between lying down and standing up, approximately 7 to 20 millisieverts of ionizing radiation pass through every cell in the scan field. That range covers everything from a chest scan at the low end to an abdominal scan at the high end, and the numbers translate to the radiation equivalent of 3 to 7 years of natural background exposure deposited in under 2 minutes. Nobody told you the dose, added it to the total from every scan before this one, or explained what those photons did to the DNA inside the cells they passed through. Before this goes any further, a CT scan whose findings change treatment is worth the radiation cost. Every word of that. A physician who orders a scan because your symptoms demand it, because clinical findings require it, because the image will determine whether you receive one treatment or another, has made a decision the physics supports entirely. What follows is about understanding what happens during those 90 seconds so you can distinguish between a scan ordered because something needs answering and a scan ordered as annual surveillance that has never found anything and would not change your care if it did. The physics is identical in both cases. Whether the image justified the dose is a different question. One sequence runs millions of times during a single CT scan, beginning with one photon and ending with one enzyme. Photon strikes water. Water produces a radical breaks DNA. Enzyme finds the break. Enzyme repairs or fails. Most repairs succeed. The scan's biological cost lives in the ones that fail and in the fact that the total from every scan, every X-ray, every flight at cruising altitude accumulates on a ledger your body keeps, but nobody reads. You felt nothing during the scan. No warmth, no tingling, no sensation of any kind. The photons passed through your tissue at the speed of light, and the damage they left behind was molecular, silent, invisible to every sensory system your body operates. Now here is what happened at the atomic level. Each X-ray photon entered your tissue carrying approximately 120 kilo-electron volts of energy, enough to eject electrons from their atomic shells. At that energy, the photon interacts with atoms in your tissue through 2 dominant mechanisms. In the photoelectric effect, the photon is completely absorbed by an inner shell electron, transferring all its energy and ejecting that electron from the atom at high speed. In Compton scattering, the photon transfers part of its energy to an outer electron, ejecting it and continuing onward with reduced energy to interact with another atom further along its path. Both mechanisms produce high-energy electrons freed from their atoms and traveling through your tissue at speeds approaching the photon that liberated them. Where the chemistry begins is the ejected electron. The electron collides with surrounding molecules, and in tissue that is 60% water by mass, the most probable collision is with a water molecule. The impact strips a hydrogen atom from the water, producing a hydroxyl radical, one of the most chemically reactive species in all of biology. The radical exists for nanoseconds. In that vanishingly small window, it attacks the nearest molecular target within 1 to 2 nanometers of where it formed. When that target happens to be the sugar phosphate backbone of a DNA strand, the radical severs it, producing a break. A single backbone cut is a single-strand break, repairable with high fidelity because the intact opposite strand provides a template for reconstruction. When 2 breaks occur on opposite strands within 10 to 20 base pairs of each other, the result is a double-strand break. Both backbones severed, the helix opened, the template for clean repair compromised on both sides. The physics of the damage runs through an intermediary. The photon never touched your DNA directly. It struck a water molecule. The water molecule produced the radical, and the radical broke the DNA. Your own water, 60% of your mass, is the intermediary that converts the photon's energy into biological damage. A bullet passing through a plaster wall does not harm the person on the other side by reaching them. The shrapnel from the wall does the harm. The photon is the bullet. Your water is the wall. Your DNA is on the other side. Each CT scan produces approximately 1 double-strand break for every 20 cells in the scan field. Across the billions of cells in an abdominal scan volume, that translates to millions of DNA breaks from a single exposure. Each damaged cell faces a decision governed by the severity of the break. Minor damage triggers repair. Severe damage, breaks too complex or too numerous for confident reconstruction, triggers apoptosis, programmed cell death, in which the cell destroys itself rather than risk copying a dangerous mutation into its daughter cells. Apoptosis is protective, a quality control mechanism built into every cell that has carried DNA for billions of years. The cell measures the damage against its own repair capacity and, when the damage exceeds confidence, chooses self-destruction over uncertain reconstruction. The threshold between repair and self-destruction is calibrated by proteins that survey the break and assess whether clean repair is achievable. When the assessment fails, the cell initiates its own dismantling, breaking itself down into components that neighboring cells absorb and recycle. Between repair and self-destruction, the vast majority of the scan's damage resolves within hours. The biological cost concentrates in the narrow category between them, breaks significant enough to mutate but subtle enough to escape the self-destruct trigger. What happens to those breaks? Your cells carry one of the most ancient molecular systems in biology, DNA repair enzymes, present in every cell, operating continuously, handling thousands of DNA breaks every single day from sources that have nothing to do with a scanner. Cosmic rays from space strike your DNA daily. Radon gas from soil irradiates your lungs with every breath drawn indoors. Potassium-40 in the food you ate this morning emits radiation inside your own digestive tract. Carbon-14 woven into your DNA itself undergoes radioactive decay on its own schedule. The total from all natural sources, approximately 10,000 to 100,000 DNA lesions per cell per day, the vast majority repaired so quickly and so accurately that the cell never registers the event. Your repair enzymes were managing radiation-induced DNA damage long before any scanner existed. The scan adds to a queue they already process around the clock. Repair enzymes apply the same molecular machinery to radiation damage that they apply to the thousands of breaks from natural sources. The distinction between a break caused by a cosmic ray and a break caused by a CT scan photon is invisible at the molecular level. The chemistry is identical. The hydroxyl radical produced by a cosmic ray interaction is chemically indistinguishable from the hydroxyl radical produced by an X-ray photon interaction. The enzymes process both without knowing the source, and the fidelity of the repair depends on the complexity of the break, the availability of a template, and the speed of the enzyme relative to the cell division cycle. Three major repair pathways handle the work. Base excision repair. The fastest cuts out a single damaged base and fills the gap using the undamaged opposite strand as a template. Quick, high fidelity, handling the simplest forms of radiation damage within minutes. Nucleotide excision repair handles bulkier damage that distorts the helical shape, cutting out a larger section of the damaged strand and rebuilding it from the template. Slower, still highly accurate, homologous recombination handles the most dangerous lesions, double-strand breaks where both backbones are severed, and template-based repair is no longer straightforward. This pathway uses the sister chromatid, the complete duplicate copy of the chromosome that exists after DNA replication, as the source for reconstruction. The biological equivalent of restoring a corrupted file from a saved duplicate. Well, the repair system operates at a baseline fidelity below 1 error in a billion base pairs per cell division under normal operating conditions, an accuracy evolved across billions of years of continuous exposure to cosmic radiation, solar ultraviolet, and natural radioactive isotopes in the Earth's crust. The enzymes begin arriving at a double-strand break within minutes of the damage event, assembling a multi-protein repair complex that reads the sister chromatid template and rebuilds what the radical destroyed, base by base. Enzymes work through the expanded workload with their full machinery, their full fidelity, the precision they apply to every break they encounter. Most repairs are perfect, some are imperfect. The template strand was also damaged by a nearby radical. The enzyme misread a base during reconstruction. The break was too complex for clean repair, and the cell activated a faster, lower fidelity pathway to close the gap before the next division began. After each repair, a quality checkpoint intervenes. If the reconstruction was clean, the cell resumes normal function. If the repair was flawed and the cell detects the error, it can trigger a second attempt or, if severe enough, self-destruction. The mutations that survive onto the permanent record are the ones that passed both the repair system and the quality checkpoint, errors subtle enough to escape both layers of correction. Each surviving mutation lands in one of two territories: the 98% of the genome that codes for nothing functionally critical, or the 2% that includes tumor suppressor genes like p53 and retinoblastoma protein and growth-regulating proto-oncogenes. Mutations in the 98% are silent passengers copied forward without consequence. Mutations in the 2% are the dice rolls that carry biological weight, accumulating across decades of cell division that copy the error into every daughter cell from that point forward. Road crews handling normal daily wear on a busy highway stay ahead of the damage without falling behind. A storm hits overnight and opens hundreds of new craters across a 30-kilometer stretch. The crew works through the backlog methodically. Most repairs are solid and durable. A few are patched imperfectly because the damage was deeper than usual, because two craters opened next to each other and the road surface between them was compromised. Those imperfect patches hold for months, the surface looks intact, and nobody notices the structural weakness beneath the asphalt. The CT scan is the storm. Your repair enzymes are the crew. The imperfect patches are the mutations the enzymes left behind. The road holds. The weakness is there. I ask about the dose before each scan now. The question takes 5 seconds. The answer tells me what my repair enzymes are about to process and whether the image justifies adding to their queue. But what happens to the mutations that made it through? Every uncorrected mutation, every error the enzymes left behind, adds to a lifetime total that started accumulating from the first X-ray you ever received. No dose ever resets. No cellular mechanism exists to zero the counter. Every exposure adds to one molecular total. The unit is the millisievert, a measure of biological effect from ionizing radiation, and the resulting arithmetic resets the intuition of anyone who encounters it for the first time. Natural background radiation delivers approximately 3 millisieverts per year from the 4 sources already running through your body around the clock. Over a decade, 30 millisieverts. Over 50 years, 150. That is the baseline your repair enzymes evolved to manage without clinical consequence. They handle it because they evolved under it. The daily break rate from background radiation is the workload the system was calibrated for across evolutionary time. Every organism alive today descends from cells that survive this baseline load. The repair machinery is precisely matched to a specific damage rate. Medical imaging operates above that baseline. One dental X-ray adds 5 to 10 microsieverts, roughly 2 days of background. Negligible as a single event. One chest X-ray adds approximately 1/10 of a millisievert, about 12 days. One mammogram adds 4/10 of a millisievert. One chest CT adds 7 millisieverts, approximately 2 1/3 years of background, delivered in the scan's duration. One abdominal CT adds 10 to 20 millisieverts, 3 to 7 years of background in the exposure window. Medler and colleagues cataloged these effective doses across medical imaging modalities in radiology, establishing the reference values that allow the comparison. If you have received 3 abdominal scans across a decade, you have added 30 to 60 millisieverts to your lifetime ledger, the equivalent in years of background delivered across 4.5 minutes of total scan time. Your car has an odometer that counts every kilometer driven and displays the total on the dashboard. The number only goes up. You see it every time you start the engine. Your body has the equivalent of a radiation odometer written in accumulated mutations across every cell that has been exposed. That number only goes up. The difference is that nobody reads it, nobody displays it, and no dashboard exists. Your body tracks the total in its DNA. Your medical system does not. No centralized record aggregates your imaging radiation across providers, across hospitals, across the decades of scans that began with a first chest X-ray and continued through every subsequent investigation. How many scans have you received across your lifetime? Can you name them all? Can you estimate the total dose? Most people cannot, because the number was never presented as a running total, never framed as cumulative, never discussed as a quantity that only increases. Once deposited, the mutation does not become a tumor at the time of the scan. It sits in one cell, copying itself into each daughter cell through every subsequent division, carrying the error forward through years of silent replication that produce no symptom, no sign, no abnormality on any test. The cell divides and the daughter cells divide, and the mutation propagates through the lineage like a typo copied forward through every revision of a document. The original author made the error, every subsequent copy carries it, And the reason nobody connects the scan to the diagnosis is the delay between the photon and the clinical consequence. A delay so long that the medical record has usually forgotten the scan by the time the consequence appears. Radiation-induced cancer follows a multi-hit model first proposed by Knudsen in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in 1971. A single mutation is rarely sufficient for malignancy. Tumor suppressor genes like p53 exist in two copies, one inherited from each parent, and both must be inactivated before the cell loses growth control. This redundancy is the body's insurance against exactly the kind of damage a CT scan deposits. One copy can be knocked out and the cell continues functioning normally, the remaining copy producing enough suppressor protein to maintain growth regulation. The first copy may be knocked out by the scan at 50. The cell continues functioning because the second copy is intact. 5 years later, background radiation or a random copying error knocks out the second copy. Both breaks are gone. Proto-oncogenes require activating mutations in specific positions to accelerate growth. The full transformation from a normal cell to an uncontrolled one requires multiple independent genetic events across multiple genes, accumulating from different sources across a decade or two. Cancer appearing at 65 is the product of mutations accumulated across 15 years from sources that were never connected to each other. The scan at 50 provided one hit. Background radiation provided another. A copying error during routine cell division provided a third. The delay between each event and the final consequence made the causation invisible. Nobody connects the routine scan 15 years ago to the diagnosis today because the physics of multi-hit carcinogenesis spans a timeline longer than medical memory. The scan was ordered, the scan was normal, the scan was forgotten. The mutation it deposited was not. Brenner and Hall calculated the cumulative cancer risk from CT scanning in the New England Journal of Medicine, estimating that the prevailing rate of CT usage may account for 1.5 to 2% of future cancers. The risk per individual scan is small. The risk across a population receiving hundreds of millions of examinations per year, accumulated across decades of individual histories, is the arithmetic that justified their concern. I sat down one evening and added mine, 3 abdominal scans, 1 cardiac angiogram, 2 chest x-rays across 15 years. The sum was moderate. The fact that nobody had ever totaled it was what stayed with me. Everything changes here. Every element of the sequence is established. Photon to radical, radical to break, break to repair, repair to mutation, mutation to accumulated damage to delay. The sequence runs from nanoseconds to decades, from a single water molecule to a lifetime of accumulated probability. Each element connects to the next through physics that operates at a scale you cannot feel and a timeline you cannot track. But the risk does not stay constant across a lifetime. It changes with age, and the direction of the change is the opposite of what you expect. What happens to the risk when the body receiving the dose is 75 instead of 45? Radiation risk from a CT scan is highest in younger patients and lowest in older patients. The reason is time. Radiation-induced cancer requires a decade or more to develop through the multi-hit sequence. A scan at 45 gives the deposited mutation 3 decades to accumulate the additional hits needed for malignant transformation. A scan at 75 gives it far fewer years, and the cancer may never develop within the remaining lifespan. Less remaining time means less realized risk from the dose delivered. But a second risk runs in the opposite direction. The finding the scan reveals the nodule, the mass, the incidental density, triggers interventions, biopsy, further imaging, surgery, treatment. Recovery margins at 75 are narrower than at 45. Anesthetic clearance is slower, wound healing takes longer, and the surgery a 50-year-old recovers from in 2 weeks can produce months of complications at 78. The cascade from image to intervention to recovery is where risk concentrates in older patients, and the cascade begins with the scan itself, with the image that revealed what would otherwise have remained undetected and potentially harmless. Well, the inversion reframes the entire risk calculation. At 45, the radiation matters more than the cascade because the body has decades for the mutation to progress and the resilience to tolerate whatever intervention the image triggers. At 75, the cascade matters more because the mutation has less time to progress, but the body has less capacity to absorb the biopsy, the surgery, the treatment. The dose was identical at both ages. The biological meaning of that dose changed because the body receiving it changed across every dimension that determines outcome. Identical photons, identical radicals, identical breaks, processed by a repair system operating under different constraints and facing different time horizons. If you are 55 and your physician suggests an annual CT as part of routine surveillance, the radiation cost of that scan will be paid across the 30 or more years your repair system has to manage the deposited mutations. If you are 75, the radiation cost is lower because the time horizon is shorter, but the cascade cost of any incidental finding the scan reveals is higher, because your body tolerates the investigation less well. The question for both ages is whether the image will change what happens next. If the answer has been no for the past 5 or 10 years of identical scans, the cost has been real and the benefit has been theoretical. An incidental finding on a scan, a small pulmonary nodule, a renal cyst, a pancreatic density, triggers a protocol, follow-up imaging to measure growth, biopsy if the growth exceeds a threshold, surgical consultation if the biopsy is indeterminate. Each step carries its own risk. Each follow-up scan adds to the radiation total. Each biopsy carries infection and bleeding risk that scales with age. Each surgical intervention requires anesthesia and recovery in a body whose margins for both have narrowed across the decades. The finding that would have been monitored and dismissed at 50 may trigger a sequence of investigations at 75 that the body tolerates poorly. This is the paradox the annual surveillance scan exposes. If you're 70 and have received annual chest CTs for a decade without a clinically significant finding, you have accumulated approximately 70 millisieverts, roughly 23 years of background equivalent, from scans that never changed management. Each scan was individually defensible. The cumulative cost was never discussed. 5 orders of magnitude separate the two. Where does the scanner sit against the other sources of radiation you encounter? And the radiation source you worry about most may be the one that matters least. Now, the airport body scanner uses millimeter wave technology, radio frequency electromagnetic waves at frequencies that cannot break chemical bonds, cannot ionize atoms, cannot produce hydroxyl radicals, cannot damage DNA. The ionizing radiation dose from an airport body scanner is 0. The technology operates at wavelengths that interact with the surface of your clothing and skin, but lack the energy to disrupt a single chemical bond in a single molecule inside your body. 0 breaks, 0 radicals, 0 mutations, 0 entries on the record. Compare that to the scan you agreed to without hesitation. The dental X-ray delivers 5 to 10 microsieverts. The mammogram delivers 400 microsieverts. The abdominal CT delivers 10,000 to 20,000 microsieverts. The ratio between the airport scanner and the abdominal CT is 0 to 20,000. If you watch the airport scanner with unease and agree to the annual CT without a second thought, the risk hierarchy is inverted by a factor of approximately 140,000, 5 orders of magnitude. The anxiety sits as far from the exposure that earned it as a millimeter sits from a kilometer. Pierce and colleagues tracked 178,000 patients who received CT scans in childhood, publishing in The Lancet that cancer incidence in the years following was measurably elevated, dose-dependent, and consistent with a linear model predicting risk proportional to dose, with no threshold below which the probability drops to 0. The study was large enough to detect what any individual exposure could not: the statistical signal of accumulated probability across a population. The arithmetic nobody performs. My own flinch at the airport scanner dissolved the day I learned this ratio. The exposure that tensed my shoulders carried 0. The exposure I never questioned carried years. But the enzymes do not run at full speed in every body. Your repair enzymes are not fixed-rate processors running at constant speed regardless of conditions. Their efficiency responds to the state of the body in which they operate, and several of those conditions are ones you partly determine. Endogenous radical scavengers, glutathione and superoxide dismutase among them, intercept hydroxyl radicals before they reach DNA, reducing the total number of breaks entering the repair workload in the first place. Sleep quality matters directly because DNA repair activity peaks during deep sleep when cellular resources are diverted from daytime functions to maintenance pathways. A scan followed by a night of deep, unbroken sleep gives the repair system its optimal operating window, the full complement of enzymes working at their highest throughput through the damage the scan deposited that morning or afternoon. A scan followed by fragmented sleep gives the repair system a reduced window at reduced efficiency, processing an identical backlog of breaks with fewer resources and less time before the next cell division copies any unrepaired damage into the daughter cells. Chronic systemic inflammation suppresses repair enzyme expression and reduces repair fidelity during the hours when the damage backlog is deepest. Hydration status affects the cellular environment in which the radical chemistry occurs. Because the radical is produced from water and the concentration of reactive species depends on the composition of the surrounding cellular fluid, the same radical chemistry that produced the DNA break in the first place continues in the hours after the scan as secondary reactive species interact with damaged sites, and the body's ability to quench those secondary reactions depends on its antioxidant reserves at the time. Arriving at the scanner well slept, well hydrated, and with low systemic inflammation does not eliminate the damage from the scan. It shifts the probability of successful repair in your favor. The shift is marginal per individual repair event. Across the full repair load from a single scan, marginal shifts compound. In a system governed entirely by probability, where every repair is a binary outcome of perfect reconstruction or surviving mutation, fractional improvements in repair fidelity reduce the number of errors that make it through the repair process and on to the permanent total. The damage is fixed. The conditions under which the fixing occurs are variable, and probability is the only currency this system trades in. The sequence from photon to permanent record runs from nanoseconds to decades, and every scan you have ever received added to it. Every repair that succeeded kept the consequence at bay. Every repair that failed became a permanent entry on a ledger that started the day you received your first X-ray and will continue accumulating for as long as you receive the last. The scanner saw inside your body paid for the view in DNA. Whether the price justified the image is the question the physics leaves open.